Line art. It's everyone's least favorite part of the drawing process. It's one of the things that beginner artists struggle with most. But line art doesn't suck. You just suck at line art. But hey, that's okay. I mean, that's why you're here, isn't it? The first step to not sucking at line art is understanding why your line art sucks in the first place. So we're gonna have a little science session. Friction. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Seriously though, there's more friction between pencil and paper than there is between glass and a stylus, and that friction acts as a sort of stabilization for your lines. It's similar to how you can easily walk on the sidewalk, but the second you hit a patch of ice, that same sidewalk's turned into a slip and slide. And if you notice, your line art is probably drastically better if you draw on paper opposed to digitally. So, good news, we know what the problem is, so how do we fix it? Long and quick strokes. Some artists use what I like to call chicken scratches when doing line art. It's a hard habit to break, but you need to break it right now. The longer and faster your lines are, the smoother they will be. So when drawing slowly, you tend to be more shaky. Use your elbow and not your wrist. When drawing, you may notice that you mainly move your wrist to make the motions to draw. Your wrist doesn't have that much power and control, but your elbow does. Not only will your movements be more controlled, but they'll also be bigger, which will help make those long, quick lines that I mentioned earlier. Do some warm-ups. You may be a little stiff when starting a new drawing, so loosen up a bit and get into the flow with some warm-ups. Personally, I like to do a few straight lines, some squiggles, circles, and hatches. These only take a few seconds, and I've noticed that if I do them, I'm able to more easily get into the flow of things. Overshooting. If you're drawing with your elbow and shoulder, then your lines will naturally be longer than the lines in the sketch. And that's a good thing. Don't be afraid to make multiple layers of lines that are longer than what they need to be and simply erasing the excess. It'll create crisp edges where the lines meet. Stabilization and correction settings. I mentioned how friction acts as a stabilizer for traditional art. And there's actually a setting for your brushes that mimics that stability. You can play around with the settings and see what feels best to you. Getting a textured screen protector. Lastly, and probably the simplest, or at least coolest solution, is buying a textured screen protector. You can literally buy a film for your tablet that feels like a piece of paper. Not only that, but they're matte, which helps with glare. I've had one of these screen protectors on my iPad for about 6 months now, and I will say, it feels like drawing on paper. That being said, you don't need this. If you use all of the tips that I mentioned in this video, your line art would be perfect without having to buy an extra tool for your iPad. But I do want you to know that it is an option if you're interested in it. And they also make little rubber nubs to put on the end of your pencils and styluses. They're like these little rubber nibs, so it creates friction, and it also mimics what it feels like to draw on paper. I've never used them. I've only ever used the matte screen protectors, but they do exist. I just can't comment on them. We've talked about how to make your line art clean and juicy, but let's talk about ways to spice it up and make it even more interesting. Play around with textured brushes. Depending on your style, you may want some texture in your lines. Manga is notorious for having textured line art, and a good pen to try for achieving that same look is a G pen. You can also play around with not only the texture but opacity by using a pencil brush instead of a regular pen brush. Again, just play around and see what you like best. Add varying line weight. Line weight, aka thickness, can add so much depth to your art you have no idea. It can convey focal points, perspective, and even gravity. Let's take Mari-kun's art for example. Her style is very simplified and cartoony, but a key detail in her style that even she mentions time and time again is the fact that she uses line weight to add and convey details. She uses thicker lines on the outsides of her art and thinner lines on the inside. And because her art is so simple, using this trick allows her to add more details within a small and simple design. Another fun thing you can try is blurring your lines. Blurred lines can actually signify how the light is hitting the subject, as well as allude to its 3D shape. That being said, you can also use it stylistically. Personally, I like to duplicate my line art layer, blur one layer slightly, and then merge the two, and this effect gives the piece an overall softer look. Avoid tangent lines. Tangent lines are multiple lines that meet up at the same point. These lines cause a lot of tension in one particular spot of a drawing, and so it makes your eyes naturally draw to them, but they're not fun to look at. If you find yourself with tangent lines in a piece, try staggering out the intersections a bit. Don't be afraid to add some color. Black is classic and timeless. That being said, it's also flat and boring, so coloring your line art is an easy way to add some extra pizzazz. Here's a drawing of mine with just plain black line art, and here's that same drawing with colored line art. To color your line art, you can either turn on Alpha to Protect, or you can add a clipping mask on top of your line art layer. Now put all these tips together and you've officially earned the title of a line art master. In all seriousness, you should see instant and visible improvement in your line art just by using these tips. If this video was helpful, let me know in the comments, and if it wasn't, also let me know. I love hearing from you regardless. But on your way down there, be sure to hit the subscribe button. That being said, that's all I have for today, and before you go, I just want to thank you so much for watching, and I want to give a special shout out to my patrons, Rattle2nd and ZomZom527. See you next week!